What is an amazing movie that has a god-awful sequel? He has a documentary called Heckler that actively pissed me off, while a doc that takes a look at the concept of hecklers and how harmful they are to entertainment sounds good on paper. About halfway through it shifts the focus to film critics, and it basically tries to correlate them to hecklers. So Jamie basically tries to posit that critics are no better than hecklers to artistic expression, a comparison that on one hand makes no sense, and on the other comes across as whiny, lamenting that he still can't get over people calling out his movies as shitty. It honestly made me dislike him even more. I think the original Jarhead is the most effective anti-war movie ever, in the sense that a lot of great anti-war movies depict war as being horrible, but do so in a way that is still engaging to a potential recruit. Like, take the Ride of the Valkyries scene in Apocalypse Now, which is supposed to show brutality and chaos, but most people watching get a hell yeah out of it. Jarhead, on the other hand, shows war as being absolutely mind-bogglingly boring. There is no better slap of reality to a kid watching it than scene after scene of other kids dicking around doing nothing but being bored out of their minds while the cool stuff happens elsewhere, and by design they are meant to miss all the action. Take the Ride of the Valkyries scene in Apocalypse Now, which is supposed to show brutality and chaos, but most people watching get a hell yeah out of it. Hell, there was a scene in Jarhead in which they were watching that scene, and that's exactly what the Marines were doing, followed by everybody getting assigned to the wrong job, then getting killed or seriously stressed out, and ending with severe PTSD and funerals. Speed 2 is a great film to watch in an extremely non-serious way if you know anything at all about boats, or anything. Really, it's so laughably bad. Highlights are, a cruise ship which works off remote control makes absolutely no sense. Even if you could work the controls, these things need a decent-sized engine room crew to keep them going. There are floodable ballast tanks, not too unreasonable, that are fully furnished with cabins inside. Wait, what? The oil tanker they nearly collided with was very obviously empty. It's sitting very high in the water. The ship's propeller is spinning at about 3,000 RPM. Ships that size will have a prop RPM of maybe 500 max. Said propeller is completely stopped by a wee bit of rope. Nope. They use the bow thrusters to turn the ship at speed. These things are for maneuvering in port and can turn the bow a degree or so a minute when stationary. The ship collides with the quayside and just keeps fucking going for 3 miles, destroying everything in its path. You probably don't need an expert to tell you it would stop dead when it hit the land. Really though, the funniest thing about this film is that the people in charge of making the sequel to a film called Speed chose just about the slowest form of transport. Soon after the success of the first film, 20th Century Fox paid Dean Devlin a large sum of money to write a script for a sequel. However, after completing the script, Devlin didn't turn in the script and instead gave the money back to the studio, as he felt the story didn't live up to the first film. It was only approximately 15 years later that Devlin met up with Roland Emmerich to try again, having felt that they had cracked a story for a sequel. I wish it was better. The part at the end about a group of planets out there who have been attacked by the aliens who have banded together in order to defeat the Harvesters, and contacted Earth in order to try and work together was a great fucking idea. The rest of the movie was gargling sweaty balls though. This was a direct-to-video one. No? Disney had a habit of basically recycling all their IPs around the early aughts and making cheap and weak direct-to-video sequels. There was a whole bunch of them: Lion King, Aladdin, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, a bunch of others. Disney's animation studios were having some real trouble trying to put together something decent around this period. The one that I would say was half decent was Lion King 1 1/2, which I always referred to as Timon and Pumbaa are dead because it basically gives those two characters the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern treatment. sans the existentialism. This reminds me of an interview with Anthony Hopkins on why he took the role in Mission Impossible 2, the hoops he jumped through, to justify it as an interesting role, that he really did imagine he was actually Daniel Day-Lewising that movie, when it was quite clear, he knew he was taking a paycheck, he just didn't want to say something mean-spirited about people who paid him a lot of money. I like Hopkins' answer better. It may be less honest, but it's more kind. Roger Ebert once recounted how Rob Schneider sent him a kind note after his surgery, and wrote, "Nobody starts out to make a bad movie." This reminds me of an interview with Anthony Hopkins on why he took the role in Mission Impossible 2. I must have blacked that movie out of my brain because I don't remember Hopkins in it at all. That movie caused me not to bother with another Mission Impossible until the 5th one came out. People were surprised I hadn't seen 3 or 4 because they were actually good, so I finally caught up then. The worst thing for me is how they messed up the sense of scale. The action in the first worked so well because it all felt heavy and meaty and rooted in reality. The camera angles from the ground gave a real sense of scale, and the slow but powerful movements of the jiggers with the thrusters on the arms and shit made it all feel right. The sequel was like Transformers with everything moving too fast and easily. This requires some knowledge of the first film. Charlie Day's character from the first movie, the kaiju scientist expert, is revealed to be the mastermind behind the kaiju attacks in the second movie. He spent the intervening 10 years between movies drifting with the same half-brain that he drifts with in the first movie, a thing he refers to as his wife, Alice. There's a scene of him coming home and talking to her, and you can see that he's written on the brain tank Alice Zoxoxo, and then he implies that drifting is sort of like sex, and that's pretty much the totality of how he spends his time when he's not at work. It's ultimately revealed that the beings from the other dimension, precursors, are controlling him, haven't polluted his mind, so he's carrying out their plans. Honestly, it's a pretty good pivot and does make the story at least interesting, even if the execution is a little blah. The Mask of Zorro, with Antonio Banderas, Catherine Zeta-Jones and Anthony Hopkins, is one of my favorite movies of all time, literally top 5 for me. The follow-up, The Legend of Zorro, is one of my top 5 disappointments. I don't know why. I guess it's just like a paint-by-numbers rehash. All the excitement, the freshness, the adventure, the heart, it's all gone in the second one. It's like the actors and writers came back and said, alright, I guess we gotta do this again then. The SpongeBob movie, SM1. SpongeBob and Patrick set out on a road trip adventure, not realizing that the fate of Bikini Bottom lies in their hands as Plankton's most ingenious plan unfolds. SM2. Not Painty the pirate steals the secret formula and SpongeBob can't make the patty from memory for some dumb reason, so they journey to the surface. For like 10 minutes after SpongeBob and Plankton go on a meaningless acid trip to fill up the feature time. SM3. Okay fans, we'll give you a road trip adventure, but not without shoehorning this stupid spin-off preview that doesn't make sense. I thought they did a decent job. It was nowhere near as good as the first, but it was still entertaining and had good music. The movie is better if it's thought of more as an homage to the first rather than a true sequel. It poked fun at it, and took a bunch of things to the extreme: car crashes, star cameos, etc. It wasn't supposed to be groundbreaking, just a fun nostalgia film, and now I'm nostalgic about nostalgia. Interesting. I think most people find the sequel even more compelling, but I can see how someone might appreciate the nuance and moral ambiguity of the original. By comparison, the sequel had a cardboard villain who was just plain evil. It was good guys versus bad guys, black and white with no shades of gray, except one of the good guys turned out to be Joe Stalin. I thought that was a fascinating twist, so I end up giving them both 5 stars. One major gripe with the sequel is how it feels like some of the Japanese plot threads were just left hanging, like Unit 731 just gets away with it, Kishi becomes Prime Minister. I thought they were setting up the sequel with it, but no. They just all go back to living normal lives like nothing happened. No wonder a lot of the Chinese fanbase is still pissed about the ending. Meanwhile, there's already rampant talk about the terrible budget they're going to give the fourth one. Like, at least wait until the third one reaches the box office before you start counting out sticks and stones. You penny-pinching bastards. No need to set yourself up for failure right off the bat. Why, if you time it just right, I bet you could make the whole franchise end with a really big bang. There's been a few that really stood out to me. I first watched Marley, pretty good. Then I saw Marley and Me, and it didn't make any sense. Is Bob Marley supposed to be reincarnated into the dog? Then you've got 28 Days. The movie with Sandra Bullock. I then watched the sequel, 28 Days Later, and man, things really got out of hand quick in the world in just another month. I think they could have done a better job explaining just how Sandra Bullock's character going into rehab led to a zombie apocalypse. Can't believe I had to scroll this far to see Sicario listed. The reason the first movie works so well is that you're seeing everything through Kate's eyes. You're constantly being kept on the edge of your seat because you're just as in the dark as she is and don't know what Matt and Alejandro are gonna drag her into next. That, coupled with one of the best action suspense scenes of the entire decade, make that film an amazing piece of cinema. With the second film, they basically took all of the exciting parts from the first without actually including the mechanisms that made it compelling in the first place. I honestly don't think it would have been possible to make a sequel that could capture the same energy as the first. In Shock Treatment's defense, there was supposed to be a trilogy planned instead. Rocky Horror Shows His Heels was to feature Brad and Janet after the events of the first one, with Rocky now with Janet, who's pregnant with Frank's baby, and Brad becomes a go-go dancer with his newfound sexual awakening and dies of an STD. Then the third movie, Revenge of the Old Queen, was Riff Raff and Magenta returned home to Transylvania to report back to the Old Queen. She's actually Frank's mother, and charges those two with finding Frank's killer. The scripts are out there somewhere, and there was even a rare promo song leaked from the third one that's a banger, The Moon-Drenched Shores of Transylvania, for those curious. But then production hell kicked in. Susan Sarandon wanted more money to return, which was too rich for them at the time, and the half measure that came out of things ended up being Shock Treatment. Fun fact, Cliff DeYoung, Brad/Farley cast in Street, was supposed to be Brad in the first one, but was double booked with another movie, so we got the original Brad. We did. It's not the greatest sequel. It has obvious ploys to capitalize on what hit in the first movie, Little Black Dress being a time warp stand-in for instance, but for what it became I still find things to enjoy from O'Brien's script. Little bits of dialogue still ends up mattering through the movie, and a few songs are catchy. Bitchin' in the Kitchen, Me of Me, Shock Treatment. I love the scene in T3 where they raise the whole damn town with the crane. Fun fact, they ran out of money and scrapped that scene midway through, but Arnie stepped in with his personal fortune to complete shooting, made it the highest budget indie film made in its day. I'm wondering if it still holds the record, but all search engines want to tell me about his gross numbers, not budget. There's a second one? My god, I've apparently been living in the dark. I absolutely loved the first one, Great White Buffalo. I even bought the soundtrack and still have it in my car, that still has a CD player. Hahaha, fuck, I'm old. My college roommate and I still sometimes say it must be some kind of ... hot tub time machine every time we see a jacuzzi. Haha, take my upvote for sending me down memory lane. Despicable Me. Look, I know everyone is scarred by the Minions at this point, but the first movie had genuine heart and emotion to it and was a solid look at a villain unexpectedly becoming a father and figuring out how to be a single dad. And the Minions back then were an amusing comedic relief that, while goofy, weren't too over the top. And then the second movie just fell into a really disappointing trope of little girls need a mother, cues fuck all the single dads who don't have or want that option, and gay fathers right also grew as Reformed now, which takes away so much of the nuance of it. And then from there the following movies all devolved into minion shenanigans and lost all semblance of charm it originally had. The first one was made by a novice director, Duffy, that relied heavily on his DP to set up camera shots. He relied heavily on his art director for the look. It was a team effort. After the success of the first one, Duffy went crazy. There is a great documentary on him and his ruining of his own career. He thought he could do the second one by himself and it was awful. The story was really good. It had a great idea for bringing Connor and Murphy back out of retirement, but the execution was horrible. And Julie Benz is god-awful with that fake accent. I vaguely remember reading somewhere years ago that the original plan when the movie was pitched was that it was a trilogy. But this was the days before trilogies were mainstream and sequels were announced before the first film even launches. Supposedly the studio said no and they condensed everything down to one awesome film. Then after the immense success of the first film, all of a sudden the studio is like, oh yes, we will take 2 more of those please, like you said. What's even more funny about this is when they released the movie in Poland, they named it Cock Vegas, because cock literally means hangover in Polish, and it's a pun, because it's similar to Las Vegas. Get it? Even the translators didn't expect a sequel, but then, uh-oh, here it comes. The sequel has arrived and it has nothing to do with Las Vegas. The name's just The Hangover Part 2, so guess what they did? They just translated it to Cock Vegas W Bangkoku, Hangover Vegas in Bangkok, and called it a day. Then the third movie happened and they just didn't bother and called it Cock Vegas 3 inches. It's somehow fortunate, as if I remember correctly it actually featured Las Vegas, but I didn't watch it so I can't say for sure. Stay the fuck away from Julia Roberts pretending to be Julia Roberts but is actually a different character, because someone thought she looked similar. Oh no, I dunno man, that speaks cinnamon to me. It's so stupid that I can't believe it made it into the movie. I always thought of it as a funny meta joke. It's hilarious that they're like, you look nothing like her, and then they get caught. I thought it was perfect, like in 11 when Clooney and Pitt walk out of the poker game and all of the paparazzi are focused on B-list celebrities. The Ocean's movies are full of star-studded casts and I love it when they play it off for comedy. I think it was a consensus that the second wasn't good but the third was decent. The fourth played more into the whole Captain Jack of it all, but I think most people weren't fans of Penelope or her character. The fifth was also pretty interesting but they probably should have stopped at 3. Edit. Part of the issue with 2 was the score. Apparently there's a whole story there. I may be in the minority here, but I enjoyed the second one more than the first. I really didn't like the accelerator suits or what they did to Cobra Commander in the first. Duke dying off in the beginning of the second one didn't bother me. Back in the 80s cartoon movie, they put Duke in a coma for the entirety of the movie. He was supposed to just straight up die, but there was such a negative backlash to Optimus Prime dying in the 80s Transformer movie. They opted to just sideline him instead of killing him. When a toy company makes a movie, you need to remove the old toys in order to sell the new toys. I would make an argument that Aliens, which was the sequel to Alien, was the actual downfall of the entire franchise and has led to the abominations we have today, and their subsequent spin-offs. The original Alien film was very reminiscent of a slow-build horror. We were dealing with something that was actually sufficiently alien, which was relatively new in terms of most popular media at the time. As when they portrayed most alien creatures they were very human-esque, or carried traits from other creatures that we could familiarize ourselves. The xenomorph however was completely unique in terms of biology, appearance, and how it portrayed itself. It showed intelligence but was still extremely animalistic. It appeared to have a goal and a plan outside of just killing everyone. but it was difficult to understand. When James Cameron got his hands on the project, it basically morphed into a generic action movie. Aliens isn't a bad movie, not by a long shot, but it doesn't live up to the first movie, and I feel it would have worked a lot better as its own franchise. It turned the xenomorph into something that was more animalistic, more baseline and primal. It turned it from a slow-build horror movie into a gung-ho rooty-tooty space cowboy shooty movie. To put it into a different perspective, take Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. Despite being separated by almost 40 years, Blade Runner 2049 reinforced what was already established by the original movie, and built off of its foundation. It was more action-oriented, but it still contained the neo-noir detective aspects. People can make an argument that it took liberties with the lore, but it felt more like an actual expansion of it. They still both perfectly mesh with one another, and you can't have 2049 without the original, and the original is enhanced by 2049, yet Alien and Aliens could effectively be two different movies.